Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's best speed tames, excluding the galley and excluding creatures which really aren't worth it. But make sure to subscribe and let's get into it. In at number 10 is the Pteranodon. Now the Pteranodon is an essential tame really that can be tamed very early on in your stages of Ark progress. And it is an extremely useful creature and one of Ark's fastest flyers. And considering how accessible this is a great tame to have for actually getting around the map quickly. Yes, an RG is a much better flyer overall, but in terms of speed, the Pteranodon is definitely winning in all of those boxes. Sadly, it doesn't really have the stamina to keep up with the speed, but if you do level it up and then you level some weight up as well, this can be a very, very good travel mount even into your latest stages of Ark playing, as there are barely any other creatures, especially on maps like the island, that actually fly faster than this thing. And again, this thing is just one of the most easy creatures to tame. You simply just go up to it, bowler it, and then club it, or you could trank it if you want, or use the slingshot if you prefer that as well. It is by far one of the easiest tames. The only real difficulty is getting the chitin and keratin for the saddle, but overall that isn't really too bad if you find some bugs around. And the Pteranodon is just extremely useful for traveling around at great speeds, and it is great in PvP scenarios as well, as it is a great raiding creature thanks to its spin attack, which can just quickly kill everything inside a base. It's really good, and it is definitely worth taming at some point. In at number 9 is the Griffin. Now the Griffin is an extremely fast tame that can be found on Ark Ragnarok, and it is significantly better than the Pteranodon in many ways. Firstly, this thing is significantly faster than the Pteranodon in speed, and also you can equip weapons on this thing, which means taming Quetzals back in the day was so much easier on the Griffin, but you wouldn't use the Pteranodon to tame a Quetzal anyway, and they have their gliding ability with much boosted damage, stamina, and weight. And also these things are accessible to every Ark player, as these things spawn on free Ark DLC. But Valguero is probably the way to go, as you can go to the Griffin trenches, where yes, you don't need to steal an egg, you simply just need to knock out a Griffin and then tame said Griffin. It will be really easy and really quick. These things aren't too difficult to tame, and they have a wealth of uses for every Ark player out there. Like I said, these things deal a wealth of damage, and also their bombing ability, where they can dive bomb. You can dive bomb into creatures as well, causing those creatures even more damage. And they are great for raiding wyvern trenches as well, as you can quickly go in, swoop in to get that egg and get out. The wyverns will simply not catch up with you. In at number 8 is the gasbags. Now this thing would be significantly easier to tame if I could actually control this thing properly. But overall, I am not the best controller of the gasbags, but this is still a really, really fast creature that can zip across the map. And it doesn't really seem like it with its big, stocky build and just general fatness. But this thing really is insane when you take it into the air. Again, if you do know how to actually control this thing. Also, the gasbags is really great if you are on a 2-player team. You don't even need a saddle to ride this thing, which has a really good benefit apart from the loss of armor. But when you do put a saddle on it, a second player can help join you, gathering all of that metal and just traversing across the map wherever you want to go, which makes this sort of a communal bus that you and your friend can travel around on, and it is much safer than traveling around on an RG or a Pteranodon when you're being carried by the person riding it, as they could accidentally drop you. Whereas when you're on the saddle of this, it is your own fault if you press the dreaded dismount key. In at number 7 is the snow owl. Yet another creature started from extinction, and yes, you may say the Managama should be on this list too, and largely I would agree with you there, but the Gallimimus and the Managama aren't going to make it onto this list, as I don't really find them very practical. And you may disagree with me there, and if you do, put the Managama in this spot, or you could put it higher up. I'm happy to hear your comments and suggestions down below. Either way, the snow owl is a great creature, very easy to tame, that is great for actually getting loot out of gachas, but it is also great at traveling the map at insane speeds. This thing really does zip across the map really, really fast, and it has that glide ability that it has with the Griffin, except this glide ability just feels so much smoother than what the Griffin has, and I always find myself traversing maps faster with the snow owl than the Griffin. It also has more abilities than the griffin. This thing can seek out any PvP or any just PvE players in general. It can seek out any organism on the Ark map, and it is really great if someone is trying to raid your base and you've simply lost them. Also, make sure to level up that stamina, as these things have a healing ability, which the more stamina you level up, you will be able to get that healing going for longer. But really, just do take into mind that this will heal every creature in the healing vicinity. Just really do take that into mind, as you may only want to heal your creatures in the situation that you might be healing your creatures in. In at number 6 is the Deinonychus. Now this creature really does have insane speed, and it can zip across the map. But on top of that, this thing has really good practicality as well, which makes this thing an extremely useful creature for all of those Ark chores that you have to do. But with its damage and all of its wealth of abilities, this thing is great for doing bosses as well, especially because they can latch onto them and deal that all famous bleed ability, which is seriously overpowered, and I don't get why Ark hasn't nerfed it yet. But either way, I am not complaining about that at all, as these things deal an insane amount of damage, and it is really worth getting some of these things to do some bosses at some point and see how you like using one, and then make up your mind on if you want to use one into the future, as I still do a lot of bosses nowadays with the Deinonychus. But this thing is also a great travel mount and is insanely fast because of it. This thing can zip across the map with really quick speeds, and also doesn't take full damage, which is a really nice bonus. Also, on top of that, it can scale walls of the Ark map, which makes this thing extremely useful for traveling around, as no matter what surface you're traversing, this thing can simply get up it with absolute ease. In at number 5 is the Shadow Mane. Now this creature is a very recent addition to Ark, but by far one of the fastest, most practical creatures in the Ark game. This thing has a wealth of abilities like the hydration buff, which will boost its damage. It obviously has its mate boost, it has its alpha pack buff, and it also can turn invisible as well, which makes this thing just extremely useful in so many ways, as it just has so many abilities. But also this thing can jump really high, and you would think for a land creature, how can this thing scale heights that big? And when you're on a flyer, the Shadow Mane is still a big threat to you, as it can simply dash up into the air and grab you and pull you back down, which can be a really good ability for PvP. Also, these things are really fast, quick and snappy in the water as well, which means these things are even more useful, because then no matter what landscape you're traversing, these things can traverse it with absolute ease, with no questions asked at all. I really urge you, if you can, at some point, really get a Shadow Mane. In at number 4 is the Astrodelphis. Now this is also another Gen 2 creature, and you'll see a reoccurrence of Gen 2 creatures as we go further along this list towards that number 1 spot. The Astrodelphis really is a creature of speed, but also of great skill too, as it does take a while to be really efficient with all of those acrobatics, and also just keeping you going exactly where you want to go, and also aiming the lasers that it fires can be of difficulty as well. But those things are definitely not out of reach for the general Ark player. If you spend even a couple of hours practicing with this thing, you will definitely get up to shape very quickly. This isn't too hard of a creature to actually get mildly good at controlling. And as you can see here, this thing has been zipping across the map that is Crystal Isles, and you can see how quickly this thing just traverses through any map. This is by far one of the fastest flyers. It kind of goes hand in hand with the Tropio, so you could put that here as well, but the Tropio is not on this list. But if it was, I'd probably put it where the Astrodelphis is. They are pretty interchangeable in terms of flyers, except the Tropio is going to be burning gasoline, and these things are burning element, which in old Ark terms is a lot more expensive, but now with Genesis Part 2, element really isn't all too hard to get. In at number 3 is the Rock Drake. Now this thing is an extremely fast mount that is extremely useful on maps like Arboration, but sadly this thing isn't viable on every Ark map. Just sometimes Ark maps are too flat for their gliding abilities to come into full effect. But if you were a much better Rock Drake glider than me, then you could probably do significantly better than I am showing here. It definitely does look just a bit dry and not even really a fast creature. But trust me, once you get this thing into a proper rhythm and you're in a proper map suited for this creature, for example Arboration, or the floating islands biome on Crystal Isles, which is where I recorded some b-roll for a creature later on the list, you will have a whale of a time, going insanely quickly across the map. And if you can't quite reach a surface in time, that's fine, as you can simply dash towards it by clicking towards it as long as the cursor is showed, as that will show that you are in the range to actually grip onto that surface and keep going with your travels. Largely, the stamina on the rock drake is really good, as you'll hardly find yourself running out of it, especially if you invest in a really good level from the get-go. These things are a great shout if you do want to tame them, but just remember, do be prepared, as losing all your stuff right down there in the purple and red zones of Arboration really is not the way that you want to go. In at number 2 is the Blood Stalker. This is a Genesis Part 1 creature, not a Genesis Part 2 creature, but again, this thing is extremely fast and extremely practical. Firstly, this thing can glide across the water with absolute ease, which means water is no longer a place where you have to simply swim or fly across. Now you can just skim over the surface, and it really does add a lot more solutions into that traveling environment. But also, these things are great under the water as well, and are by far some of the best creatures to use in the underwater biomes of Genesis Part 1. Yes, obviously you have Moses and things like that, which you'll use for the Moda boss on the map, which is the ocean boss. But in terms of just traversing that general ocean, I would always use a Bloodstalker, as they're just so quick and snappy to use, and they aren't really that big and they don't get in the way of anything. The Bloodstalker, as you can see here, sort of acts like Spider-Man would, shooting webs everywhere and then swinging onto them and gripping and going around the map really quickly. And yes, I'm not the best Bloodstalker flyer out there, but I have really seen some good ones, and it really does benefit to learn how to fly a Bloodstalker properly, if you can even call it flying, as you will really benefit from it, especially in just terms of general travel, but also in terms of getting hexagons, as loads and loads of missions require those hexagons. So it is a skill that I definitely urge you to practice at some point, as long as you do have access to the wonderful creature that is the Bloodstalker. And finally, in at number 1 is the Maywing. This creature is by far the fastest tame on Ark that, in my opinion, has a practical use. And yes, I'm going to get a lot of disagreement there with the Managama, but really, I just don't use the Managama. I'm not great at flying it. It's a bit finicky for me, but I can see why you'd put the Managama in the number 1 spot, and I will agree with you there on your opinions. But in terms of my opinions, I think the Maywing deserves to be in the number 1 spot. This thing is a really fast glider that actually I've spent some time practicing when Genesis 2 came out. Obviously, I haven't done too much as of late, but I still think I'm a very reasonably good flyer of the Maywing. Obviously, I'm not going to be the best out there, but I have done the Alpha Maywing race mission, so I can't be that bad. And that is another reason to get good at the Maywing, as again, like the Bloodstalker, this thing will get you some hexagons if you do those racing missions. And it's just a really good skill to learn as well, as the Maywing is a really good creature for traversing any map really. If it's flat or not flat, I don't really have too much of a trouble, unless it's a map like Scorched Earth, where there's like basically flatness for so large areas. Otherwise, this thing is fab. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. But what did you think, and did you agree? If not, comment your top 10 in the comments down below, and I will see you all later. Bye.